Hello, Hillary.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Great. How are you doing?
Good. We missed you yesterday. I hope you didn't show up and we just couldn't find
No, and I apologize for not letting you know I couldn't make it. I got stuck in a whole bunch of stuff. I knew Kurt was going, and he
you. Okay,
told me that
perfect.
everything went well. So
Yeah,
I
we waited
apologize.
for like 5 minutes and I was like, let's just get started because my day is
Yep,
kind of hectic.
yep, yep.
And then I was like, oh gosh, because we went wandering around the transfer station. So I was
Yep.
like, oh, I hope he's not
I'm
looking for
sorry.
us.
I should have called you. I
No,
apologize.
it's okay. It's
All
okay.
right, all right. I heard everything worked out, and the water supply is going to work, and so forth. So that's good.
Yeah, the fire department is checking into hosing and borrowing
Good.
hosing and all kinds of things.
Very good. Hillary, did I send you a copy of the final Buzzards Bay report on the INA systems? I'll send it again. Okay.
If you did, I didn't read it, and I don't know that I've seen it.
I just got it. I had a call with Erin last week, Erin Perry, and she provided it to me, and there's a lot of good information in there. So I'll send that along again.
Excellent.
Hey, Kurt, how are you?
How are you, Scott?
Good. I've got
Hi, Hillary. Long time no see.
slides, Kurt. So I don't know if I can share. Let's see. No. Somebody's going to have to enable me to share if you want me to show these slides. Are you the host, Kurt?
No.
I am the host.
Oh, Hillary, you are. Okay.
Um,
So do you know how to do that, Hillary?
I'm looking at the share screen, probably under security.
No, go to participants.
Participants.
And then I think next to my name, it says more.
Yeah.
And see if that gives the option to.
Oh, I can make you a co-host. How do you?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay.
Even better, yeah.
Okay. Done.
Now let me see if I can pull up my slides now. Had it here. Okay, wait a second here.
Hi, Hillary, it's Helen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm just trying to mute the caterpillar sounds in my background here. I'm on mute, but yes, we can hear you.
Oh, God. That's at the DPW as opposed to really big bugs, right?
No, that's not what I want.
No, it's very small children playing with a noisy caterpillar. Not a real caterpillar. It's a
Here's
toy.
my question to you. Does this audio get put on the town website? You know, the
Yes, it's
recording of the
recording.
meeting?
Yep, it's a meeting. It's a formal meeting, so yes, it does.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
That's all I wanted to know. I'm going to mute myself. I'm just here to listen. I missed the last one, which I wish I can't do
Kurt, can
everything.
you the spreadsheet I got up here? Kurt, can you see?
Yeah, I can see the screen, Scott.
Okay,
so
great.
You're shared.
Okay, thanks. All right, good. I'm
Yeah.
ready to go when you are. We'll wait a couple minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta get a quorum.
Okay.
We should have Fred and Richard. I did not hear back from John, but
And I think Nancy might join us just for the first part, right?
yeah, she indicated she probably would.
So maybe we could let her go first if you want.
Yep.
Up to you.
And from the Board of Health, I know Janet Johan was going to try to chime in here.
Great. I
here.
see her
Hi,
listed
Kurt.
here.
How are you?
Oh, is she
You there,
here?
Janet?
Oh, hi,
Fantastic.
Janet.
Hi, Hillary. Thank
Hey,
you
this
for
is
the
Fred. I'm
invite.
on.
Hi, Fred, how are you?
Doing all right. I might have to jump off and help. I might have to stop for a second just to help my mom get on a Zoom meeting with her doctor. It may take. It'll be just a second. I'll be just in the. She's just in the other room.
Okay.
Let's see. So we have Fred. Ryan, are you still on the committee or have you been removed?
Yeah, I'm not, because I'm on the select board. So,
Yeah, we need either Richard or,
Here's Richard. We've got Richard, and I'm looking to see if I have John Kumbler's phone number here so we could call him because I hate to have them miss meetings. Oh, I do.
do we have Nancy? I only see, there's Richard.
Sorry, I started without video.
We might as well get started. We do have a quorum. And hopefully John Kumbler Hillary will be able to collar him into getting on the meeting as well. Is Nancy on? I don't know if I'm seeing all participants for some reason.
You should be seeing all of them.
Okay.
Are you seeing me, Kurt?
I see Janet, Scott, Richard, Hillary, and myself and Ryan, but I don't see Fred and I don't see Helen.
Fred is here and Helen is here, but I don't see Nancy.
I must have,
Kurt, you don't see me because I have my video blocked.
oh, I see what's going on. It's just the way I did an update yesterday. Zoom, you know how Zoom sends you out those updates? Please update. There's a new plugin, blah, blah, blah. The display is now different. So anyway, let's get started. Without Nancy, Scott, we might as well dive into the first item that we were going to talk about really was trying to get a grounding in, cost per kilogram of the various strategies that we've been evaluating. And of course, your slide has a listing of pretty much everything we've been talking about in the order of magnitude. So I'll let you take off from there.
Sure. Okay. Well, you can see over here on the right, assuming you can see my cursor, I've added a column and I'm starting to put some costs in here. And some of these costs come from the Cape Cod 208 matrix. Others, for example, the INA septic cost, $370 a kilogram, actually comes from a study done with the town of Barnstable, Quantified Ventures, a year or so ago. But most of these come from the Cape Cod Commission matrix. Trying to think of, and then of course the 95 Lawrence number actually comes from some figures that John Smith gave me, who's the manufacturer of that system. So I can kind of quickly run through those, maybe starting at the top here, and just maybe for some comparison for those who have not been party to these conversations before, the general range of sewering costs, including collection system treatment and operation, is in the range of $500 to $1,000 a kilogram. Those are the numbers that come from the 208 program. I should mention those are very specific locally. Provincetown's costs are much less because they're high density. Barnstable's might even be higher. So that's a broad range. I don't know that we have good numbers in Wellfleet yet to compare to, but we could use that for a starting point, the 500 to 1,000.
We actually, Scott, when Environmental Partners did their design, which was, kind of sewering the densest section of Wellfleet, so the downtown central district, with a collection and treatment system at the transfer station. Yep. Those numbers look like about $1,200 to $1,500 a kilogram.
Okay.
It's not a lot of residents, and our density is pretty low.
Okay. Okay, that's great, Kurt. And maybe if you could later maybe give me that reference so I can get that into the document, that would be good.
Yeah, it's in their plan. We'll pull that out.
Okay, good. And I should mention these costs are prepared over life cycle analysis, so they include capital costs up front, whatever the lifespan of the technology is estimated to be, and then operation, maintenance, and monitoring. And I'll just mention for this first one on the INA systems, and we'll get into a little more detail here because we just have a recent report published by Buzzards Bay Coalition that I'm going to go through in just a minute. And the heavy factor in this $370 number is the monitoring. In the Buzzards Bay study, they're including monthly monitoring for a period of time. Then it goes to quarterly. When I looked at the Pleasant Bay permit for INA systems, it says that over time, DEP may back off on the required monitoring once we get the general approval. So there's some unknowns going forward on the INA. So these costs might be a little bit on the high side. It's possible they could go down because, as I said, the monitoring costs are significant. And if that gets, once the technologies get to general approval, which we're hoping can happen in about 3 years, then those costs should go down. So I can do some more analysis of that and maybe provide a range with some assumptions, but for now, those are kind of the numbers. So the stormwater fertilizer numbers and the PRB and the fertigation all come from the Cape Cod technology matrix. So that is 208 vintage. And those are obvious. Some of those are very site specific. So until we get more specific designs, they're hard to refine. On the 95 Lawrence one, I did, you may recall, I did some analysis of 3 different potential projects out there using the nitro system simply for the housing project at 9,900 gallons per day. And I looked at a 20,000 gallon per day and a 30,000 gallon per day project, which would include the police station, fire station element, and then possibly some existing residential homes. So as that gets larger, the unit cost goes down. So this 157 represents, I think, the 20,000 gallon per day project, which would include the 3 municipal facilities. So that starts to get fairly cost effective by adding these other nearby features. There's also the possibility as part of that project to reutilize the existing leach fields, which is a significant cost. That one looks pretty good as well. So I guess I'll stop there, Kurt, quickly, see if there are questions on the unit cost. Nothing in terms of the load reductions, nothing really has changed since our last discussion, so I won't go through those. So any questions on costs or comments?
No comments, but Nancy did join us, so she's on the line on her cell phone if we want to move her to the top.
Well, Nancy, this might be a good time to, I know you only have a little bit of time with us this morning, and I'm just showing, if you're on your phone, you probably can't see, I'm showing the spreadsheet that we looked at last meeting on all the various technologies and how these meet the thresholds. As you and I know, because we spoke recently, I really have some preliminary placeholders in here for aquaculture shellfish. Nancy and I and Johnny had a very good call a week or 2 ago about the possibility of coming up with a plan going forward. So maybe I'll let you, if you're okay with that, Nancy, just to kind of explain what you're up to and any input you might have on the shellfish part of this, which could be a portion. Thank you.
I guess I'm not, I guess I'm just, I'm feeling a little daunted by the numbers that, we were talking about in the email that you sent me, Scott, where 1 million oysters would remove 136 kilos a year.
Right.
And, I was looking back over my kind of look ahead memo that I did in 2018 for the select board and the finance committee. And I was, hopeful that within 5 years from then, we would be propagating 1 million oysters and 1 million quahogs. So, but I don't know that it's going to be possible over time, given, even if we got an upwell or post dredging, if we'd be able to accommodate much more than that in terms of increasing. And then, in the back of my mind, I always have to think of the ripple effect of, you know, like the 10 million oysters is 1,360 kilograms a year.
Right.
And that's 10 million oysters, which is basically what DMF, Mass Division of Marine Fisheries, says that, you know, the aquacultured oysters, annual aquaculture production, so not the propagation that the town is doing, but the actual aquacultural business activities that the town produces 10 million oysters a year. You know, that's 1,360 and kilograms a year, and I just don't know that how many kilograms are we trying to remove from Wellfleet? Is it 20,000?
Yeah, the
kilos a year?
whole number is up here, about 20,000 kilograms per year. That's from the build out, using the build out goal, which I think we agreed to try to use. So it's 20,000, but again, we're not looking for any one of these technologies to do the whole job. So any
Right, I get it. But
Yep.
10 million oysters, like we already have that in Wellfleet, right? So we
Okay,
have
yep.
that in aquaculture, and we'd have to just make sure that it's getting counted correctly now.
Right.
And I know I sent that spreadsheet along from DMF earlier, but
Right.
I don't see, there's no way that the town, we don't have the funds, even if we got some grant money, I don't see grant money being able to be like ad infinitum for 20 years. Like you get a grant if you're lucky, and maybe you get a 2 or 3 year grant with help. I don't know, but and then when I looked at just the number of kilos that it's removing, it just seems like a tall order. And
Yeah.
I did get, so I guess I got a little like when I saw those numbers and I realized it just seemed like less of a reality or of a probability, given what I know about funding, about our resources staff-wise, about what the market can bear. You know, what is that going to do if there's, you know, I think even just starting incrementally with what I want to do, which is 1 million pieces of each. I mean, I feel comfortable with that, but going above and beyond that, I just don't know. So, you know, yes, we can count that in, you know, and I can still sit down with Johnny and think about this stuff. But in the meanwhile, I want you to know that my head has started to turn
Okay.
in a different direction. And the other thing is that I spoke with the Eastham Shellfish Constable, and she told me that I think it was something that had happened in maybe Orleans, where in Lonnie's Pond, where they did the amount of nitrogen removed, but then they also tried to capture the biosediment, you know, basically the pseudo feces, and get that out too, because there is a tipping point, is what she was explaining, you know, and so I'm not having this firsthand, but a tipping point where the increase in shellfish, you also have to consider then the increase of pseudo feces on the bottom, which is contributing to nitrogen. And, you know, is it feasible to even get it out? I mean, I don't think it is, frankly, but so these are the two things that I've learned since our last call that I wanted to share and just hear your thoughts, Scott.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Thanks for the update. My only responses, I guess, would be that keep in mind this is probably a 20-year plus plan. So this is something to, you know, take vision and think about what could happen over that period of time rather than just the next couple of years. And in terms of the funding, at this point, I wouldn't be too concerned with that in terms of the grants, because if the numbers work out favorably on $1 per kilogram, this might be a very good investment on the part of the town, not only for propagation of shellfish, but for helping solve the nitrogen problem. So at this point, I think the cost thing, and it's also possible that this could be eligible for some of the other funding sources, like the Airbnb funding, maybe SRF, et cetera, if we get creative here. So I guess my own input would be not to hesitate based upon the cost so much. I think your comments about the market are important. That's something I've heard before. And we don't want to try to produce something that really has no market. But other than that, I think, you know, my suggestion is keep thinking, and we'll respect you, whatever you come up with. but others might have thoughts. Kurt, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. I mean, I agree with Scott. As far as funding goes, Nancy, I kind of see the wastewater plan to the extent that shellfish is a component. There's going to be a budget for the wastewater plan, and things that are in the wastewater plan are going to have to be funded out of, you know, the wastewater funding. So I would see it as supplemental to
Okay, so not coming out of my budget. I'm not going to town meeting or to the town administrator and asking for an increase in my propagation budget.
No,
Okay.
it would be separate. So we would actually line item whatever is going to be wastewater related and say that it's not coming out of your budget. It should be supplemental to your existing budget.
Okay.
So that would be my first comment. So don't, you know, Scott said, I wouldn't worry about funding. We're trying to add funding, not put a burden on the shellfish department relative to what's going on here. The other comment I have is that the propagation area that we established for 5 years or so, that we had a population there of about 4 to 6 million just in that little 2-acre area. And so, you know, I would see that kind of a concept as being potentially more viable for a couple of reasons. You know, one is it's not something that's going to impact the market if you're not putting those oysters on the market.
But we can't not put them. We can't keep it closed.
Well, we have options there. It's the area that I'm thinking about is I'm not sure what the extent of. I know there were some discussions this past fall where DMF said that the area around the marina can't be, with an active marina, you can't harvest shellfish within certain restrictions or distances.
Yeah, it's basically where all the boats are. It's where all the slips are in the back.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking is if you had that area which is non-harvestable, and that area were actually, you know, once the harbor's dredged and the sediments are more amenable, if that was cultured and had, you know, significant oyster population again, we got a 70% reduction in nitrogen. It was a really big contribution to the toughest, you know, Scott has had this heartburn about, you know, the Mayo Creek, Duck Creek area. It's just our worst area in town to try to get mitigation. The other thing that I like about that potentially is that with the amount of filtration that you get from, you know, that kind of standing oyster population, it's also going to reduce significantly the ultimate dredging needs. I mean, it's a strategy that's been used in a lot of other marinas to reduce dredging requirements over the long term by having, you know, they do it in Florida and Virginia, a lot in Texas, a lot of places. Their marinas are heavily oyster populated for that reason, and they leave them alone. You know, for both reasons, that you don't want to harvest because of the proximity to the marina for health reasons, and then also the filtration reason. So, you know, we got a 70% reduction in nitrogen from that, you know, to, you know, 4 million or so population.
So the one thing that Johnny was mentioning on our call with Scott was that DMF does not want towns to propagate in prohibited areas. You know.
Yeah, I've had.
I mean, I can follow up on that, but Johnny was saying that they just don't, because it's too much of a you know, a temptation for people. And you know, I guess if we got the go ahead, we'd just have to talk to the harbor masters about where do you put mulch when you have boats that are going to be there and on dry land at low tide every day.
Hey, Nancy, I have a suggestion because I know you have limited time. I'm happy to follow up with you on this as from a prior conversation. And I also did have a talk with some people in Mashpee recently. Rick York has retired, the shellfish constable there. But as you know, he was a huge proponent of this. And Mashpee does have a significant part of their wastewater plan is shellfish. So it might be worth us, and I could do this with you, touching base with them just to see exactly what they've done and see if there might be some, you know, examples there that we could follow. But I'm happy to follow up.
Yes, I hadn't gotten to that on my to-do list yet. I know it's on my
That's
to-do
fine.
list. It's
That's fine.
you know, and as I said to you, it's like I'm trying to chip away at it a little bit each week,
Yep,
but
yep.
you know, I didn't get to it this week at all. So,
That's
you know,
fine.
that's the
No
reality of
problem.
everything else that's on my plate. And, yeah, so.
Well, why don't we
it's
plan a
just-
call
it's not
sometime
gonna move quickly.
offline, Nancy, just
Yeah.
to follow up, and I'm happy to help however I can, okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Thank you very much, Nancy.
You're welcome. Thanks for,
Can I jump in?
oh,
Sorry. Kurt, may I jump in?
Sure, yeah.
You can see the hand raise if that's how you want to.
Yeah, I actually still can't get a full screen for some reason.
Okay. Two things. The first is Duck Creek on the spreadsheet has aquaculture. Duck Creek starts, the MEP defined Duck Creek starts at the railroad causeway. Basically, that means that there's nowhere suitable within Duck Creek to actually grow oysters because there's there's no bottom that's not a habitat for salt marsh related and fauna. The second is the size of the reduction in total in terms of the aquaculture. There's going to be very little appetite for this large of a aquaculture program among the shellfish community. I can just say right off the bat that they will be very, very adamant that they do not want anywhere near 10 million oysters to be grown for wastewater reduction purposes.
yeah, and I mean, I'm talking, Ryan, I'm talking about doing what the department was thinking of doing anyway, which is $1 million of each. Like, that's my plan.
Yep.
Which I do think has support.
What period of time would that be over, Nancy?
I mean, I was, hoping within 5 years from 2018.
Okay.
But it depends on dredging, because without an upweller, we can't. We can certainly add more mulch, within the MIPA permitted areas. We can certainly do that, and then we could increase that from the wastewater budget. And it would allow us, like, each year we don't have enough mulch to put in every area of the harbor, so we pick and choose, but we could certainly, if we had more, then, and I think that people would appreciate that, it's because it's at the behest of Mother Nature. So I do think that would be well received in terms of oysters. And then if we've learned anything this COVID year, it's that, quahogs are actually king in the market, and that they suffer less market fluctuation and more consistent demand than do oysters. So, if there's a way for us to increase quahog production over a few years, I think that we'd be interested in looking at that, because we would have the support of the shellfishing community.
Yeah, and we can provide a credit for that. That's fine. So either or both would be fine. And I guess what I'm just thinking is, the reason I ask you about the time frame, if you're thinking about $1 million over 5 years, is it reasonable to think about $4 million over 20 years as a continued growth? And again, you don't need to answer that now, but that's the kind of thing I think would be worth thinking through, because this is a plan. This is a long-term plan, and there's going to be adaptive management.
Right.
But
the other thing that I don't want us to lose sight of is that we take all these options and we present them to the town. So we have varying interests throughout town, and it's the whole town that ultimately decides, we'll make a recommendation, but all of these options go into the package.
Okay.
So
Can I say something here, Kurt?
Sure, go ahead, John.
I think we have to be very, very cautious in this area of our um, um, reduction plan, because I think there's so many variables we can't control, and that it would, I see the aquaculture shellfish component as much more a supplement or an auxiliary to our main plan. If we build this in as a central part of the plan, I think that's very dangerous, because there are all kinds, like, I'm concerned the idea of projecting, well, we've got 1 million in the next 5 years. In 10 years, we can have, another 1 million or so. There's a limit. We don't know the growth potential. Does it grow exponentially? Does it grow arithmetically? Or does it, in fact, you reach a maximum point where the growth rate declines? So I just think, and then there's the question of how we manage it. What if we don't take any oysters out? What's the efficiency of the reduction? There is the potential of the oysters adding actual nitrogen over time if we're not managing it carefully. So I just want to keep an immense amount of skepticism about and I also think the shell fishermen will be concerned if there's a great deal of publicity about the Wellfleet oysters cleaning the harbor in terms of marketability of their product. So I would like to see us hold the shellfish element as a kind of auxiliary. Great if it works, but don't make this a central part of our plan and our planning, or else I think we could get very badly burned in the future.
Well, a couple of responses there. I think just factually, it is an auxiliary component. I mean, Scott's strategy here is to work up to a variety. The vast majority of what we're expecting to get out of this plan comes from septic enhancement, and that's a very, very big component in the overall plan. So the shellfish piece is relatively small. It is very cost effective. The other thing is that there's no scientific data that indicates that growing shellfish increases nitrogen. The pseudofeces, that whole discussion, the only science out there is that when you leave shellfish in place, you tend to get a greater nitrogen reduction from that population than the actual harvested oyster. So there's two ways to look at it. So, with regard to Nancy's propagation program, I think that has to stand on its own. It's just something that we get to count, and that's going to depend on what Nancy thinks she needs to do for her, for her program. I think that's completely independent. The thing that I'd like to see, as an addition to the whole plan, that's more wastewater related, is this area, just as a bogey, the area off the pier that you'd leave a reef. So you're not putting those oysters on the market. You're not creating potential competition for existing shell fishermen, and you get a significantly enhanced nitrogen reduction from that strategy, as opposed to just taking the oysters out. I mean, to me, harvesting oysters as part of a wastewater plan is like, cutting down trees in the rainforest to save the rainforest. It doesn't make any sense. And at the end of the day, the overall goal of our whole nutrient reduction plan is habitat restoration. It's to begin the restoration of eelgrass, to see nutrients reduced so that marine fauna can once again, proliferate. So we got to kind of think about, I think, the ultimate goals as well. And, it kind of goes back to what, Hillary was saying, as far as, there's going to be a lot of debate about different elements of the plan, and ultimately the voters are going to have to weigh in here. But those are just some of my thoughts.
All right, let me suggest, given, especially in recognition of the time we have, the biggest thing on the list here is the septics, and I've got a few updated slides on that. So why don't we jump into that and we can come back.
Scott, this is Helen. May I just chime in quickly? I apologize.
Certainly.
Yeah. So, Hillary, I wish Nancy was still here. One of the most important things is that we already have a lot of shellfish filtering a lot of nitrogen.
I am still here, Helen. I'm multitasking. I'm still here.
Okay. And we all know this. And one of the ways to keep the habitat viable is not to have any unmanaged density in the habitat. We don't want areas that have shellfish growing that aren't being, shall we say, gardened. Even in the wild,
Why
there
would
is a
that-
kind of
Why-
cycle of harvesting and growth and harvesting and growth and thinning out. And I refer to it as gardening even in the wild, because one of the wake-up calls for me early on years ago was reading about density issues having to do with disease and so forth. The other thing is, I want to highlight what Nancy already said. The DMF does not encourage propagation reefs in places that invite, shall we say, lack of compliance. I really heard that. And if you just have a place that you can't ever take the shellfish from, like around the pier, and those would be polluted shellfish, definitely contaminated in some way or another, something would have to happen with them eventually. So from everything I've learned over many years now, I strongly encourage this committee to consider all the nitrogen, all the mediation that's already happening in what we've got and how well that's working, and to keep it going like that, not to add to it in a way that won't be sufficiently gardened and managed. And the second thing, to address what Kurt said about eelgrass, I'm all for that. Scallops love it. It does a whole lot of other things. That's something I know more about than some other stuff. But in order to have the eelgrass flourishing in the harbor, we'd have to address dragging. And that's a whole other can of worms. Thank you.
So I think, does anybody else have anything to say on that? So Nancy, thank you again for joining us. I'm sure we'll have more discussions about this in the future, and continue to have discussions about it as we try to develop these options more fully.
That's good. All right, I am about to go on patrol.
Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you.
Say-
All right, why don't I jump into the septic issue? There's a new report out. I had heard a presentation on this, I don't know, 6 months ago, and they finalized the work. This was a project done, as you can see, cooperatively between the Buzzards Bay Coalition, County Health, the Mass Tech program, etc. And I'll provide this report. I thought I had maybe already sent it, but I'll get it to you. I just got it last week from Aaron Perry at the Cape Cod Commission. And essentially what they did is they installed about 4 or 5 different technologies, including John Smith's nitro system in Falmouth, and did a lot of analyses on performance and cost. And most interestingly, they spent quite a bit of time thinking about this issue of a responsible management entity, which is critical to developing this in a way that we might get credit as part of this program. And so I'll try to just touch on that a little bit. I just simply copied a couple sections here, which I'll just run through. And the way this kind of works is, as you can see, it's a joint program between private property owners and the town. And to make this work, the thought is that you need some sort of a structure. And this is this concept of this responsible management entity, which in the case of Falmouth, they're recommending it's the town or a component of the town. But let's just quickly run through this. So on the property owner's side, as it says up here, the individual property owners would actually be doing the installations of these systems, and they would have to grant access, which they kind of need to do anyways, I think, on some of these systems for the purpose of monitoring, et cetera, going forward. On the part of the town, the municipal participation, the thought is that the town would purchase the nitrogen removal technology component of it. In the case of John Smith's system, that would be that middle compartment, if you recall, the concrete box with the wood chips in it. They would actually provide that, as it says here, to the property owner at no charge. And then the property owners would be responsible for the site engineering plans to essentially figure out where it's going to go, etc. So you can see it's kind of a shared cost approach. It's also saying here that the town would be the property owners would participate in the landscaping and etc. And then the third section here on the part of the town would be, as it says here, Falmouth. In the case of Falmouth, they would designate an appropriate department, and they would be the ones responsible for the record keeping, inspecting, monitoring, operation, maintenance, pumping, etc. of the system over a period of time. So that's kind of what they envisioned as a sharing of responsibilities. I know we've talked in Wellfleet about the possibility of the town providing some funding for the nitrogen removal component of the system. So I think this is somewhat consistent with what we've already talked about. The next slide just kind of goes from some bullets of what they're talking about in Falmouth. They're trying to target systems, as we've discussed here, that can meet the 10 milligram per liter standard, which again, as I think we all know, many of the INAs that are currently approved by DEP don't meet the 10 milligrams. So they're really trying to focus on the new wave, if you will, and including the nitro system and some others, and where they've been documenting 75% removal, etc. In the case of Falmouth, they were looking at a phase 1 with 187 homes. Again, town would provide the equipment, meaning the treatment component. The property owners provide the rest of it. They set up this responsible management entity. And then they have a 2-year, they call it probationary period, where they do more intensive monitoring, because most of these, or I should say all of these enhanced IA systems, or none of them have general approval at this point. So there needs to be more intensive monitoring during the first 3 years to get them to the general approval. And that refers back to what I mentioned earlier. The monitoring costs are going to be more significant, much more significant during the first few years.
Can I interrupt you there and ask a question?
Yeah, please.
The monitoring really, I think, is the current amount of monitoring is based on the fact that the systems don't have a lot of track record.
Right.
Are we gonna, I mean, would it be your expectation that we get to a point where once the track record's established, effectively this intensive, expensive monitoring element kind of goes away because we now know what they do?
Yeah, that's the intent. I don't know if it goes away, because there may be some like annual monitoring of a certain number of systems, et cetera, as part of the watershed plan, the permit. But certainly the monthly and quarterly gets pushed back. Basically, this DEP regulates these systems in 3 phases: pilot, provisional, and general use. These systems we're talking about are all in the first, most of them are in that first step, the pilot. They have to get at least 15, and I think I just heard John Smith now has 17 in, so he's got enough in for that first step, but he needs a couple years of monitoring data to prove it out. Then he moves to provisional when you need to get a total of about 55 systems, not in a town, but across the whole state, to move to general approval. Once you get to general approval, the monitoring can go significantly down, as you're suggesting, Kurt. I looked at the Pleasant Bay permit, which we've been using as a model, and that it doesn't provide clear. They haven't, basically it says they're going to negotiate that as they go forward. There's not a clear or already confirmed monitoring once they get out past into that general use situation. But you're absolutely right. It would be reduced substantially as you go forward, and that's the idea.
Well, the Board of Health, for example, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but if we were actually to implement Board of Health regulation requiring systems that, for replacements that have to meet the 10 milligram standard, roughly how many systems are we talking about annually, like say over the next couple of years for Wellfleet?
Well, Hillary, you provided me some estimates of repairs, upgrades, and new systems, and I recall the numbers were in the 40 to 50 range per year. That doesn't have to be the number, but that was one number that I think you had thrown out, because it would be nice to not be knocking on people's doors saying you have to replace your system today. Instead, the other possibility is to tie this to a real estate transfer situation, which would increase the number even more. But I don't know, Hillary, do you want to respond to that?
Well, what we did was we looked at the number of septic permits that we had issued, annually, and the number of repairs. So we have those numbers. We don't have exact numbers of real estate transfers,
Yeah.
but I think we could look at either or all of those options. The only thing that sort of trips me up is if we require these upgrades, we talked about subsidizing them in
Yep.
some fashion. So that's on the table too. And then the other thing that I think the Board of Health gets hung up on is if we require these now, and for some reason the technologies aren't working and we then have to go to sewering, what happens to these folks that we've now made upgrade? So just a couple of outliers that I think still give me a little agita.
Yeah, those are good points. I know in Chatham, Hillary, when they they had some INAs downtown in areas that were going to get sewered, and I'm pretty sure they gave those property owners some relief. I don't remember the exact number of years, but let's say something like 5 or 10 years before they'd have to connect to the sewer. That would be up to the town, I think, to decide what sort. But there is certainly the possibility of providing relief to those people who have just invested in a system, because certainly that's understandable that they would be concerned. So there may be a mechanism to deal with at least that last concern. Yep.
Just a quick question, right? First off, I have a high level of confidence that these ANI systems have already met the requirements. That they're not. These are real numbers. This is settled science. They aren't going to change.
Yep.
However, Hillary brings up a good point, which is like, okay, what happens if the DEP turns around and says, okay, you're now on a consent order to put in a sewage system because you're not removing enough nitrogen quickly or enough in this watershed. So that's like, what's the possibility of that?
Well, I think that's the purpose of the permit. The permit is essentially a contract between the town and the state. And if it performs, then they can't come back, I don't think, and force you to change the program if it's working. Again, I looked at the Pleasant Bay permit, and the way they're going to give credit for INAs is on the monitoring data. In other words, they're not going to assume that they're not going to use 75%, which is the number I get in the slide here. They're going to actually look at the monitoring data. And in fact, John Smith just gave a presentation recently. He's getting 95% removal. So it may be better than 75%. But I think to your question, there's a little bit of a risk here. You're right, because if the system does not perform as well, then the town doesn't get enough credit. And ultimately, what DEP is on the hook, going to make the town on hook for, is restoration of the receiving waters. So that it is a possibility. At some point, they may say, "Look, this is not working. You need to build the sewer." So that is a little bit of a risk on the part of the town. But I agree with you. The performance of these things is quite impressive, and they are part of the Pleasant Bay permit as part of an adaptive management program. So there's precedent for DEP accepting them as at least part of the plan.
The other thing I want to quickly ask for is this responsible management entity. I mean, I'm kind of going operation and maintenance of these ANI systems. I'm like, that's, once again, I'm kind of going, this is sort of like settled science and engineering. Why do we need to, create a bureaucracy that does anything but monitor these things?
I think the answer is because these are going on private property, and DEP wants, is not going to be looking to contract with all the property owners individually to clean up the bay. They need they need a middle person, and in this case, it's the town. And so they want the town to take control and charge and frankly, responsibility to make sure that these things are operated and maintained. I think that's the reason.
We have to have that anyway for the watershed permit. We have to have a responsible party that's going to be overseeing the implementation of watershed permit. So it's the same bureaucratic entity that's going to oversee the overall program. So I don't see that. We have to do that. That's a legal requirement. The other thing I just would mention is I think with the, with INAs that are being done all over town, a lot of these systems are going to be in locations that may not ordinarily be locations that would be connected to a sewer system if a sewer system were put in. And an even bigger comment is that, if let's say we get even 50% of the amount that we're supposed to remove from our alternatives, the sewer system that would need to be designed would only be 50% of what we'd need. So, what we're doing is reducing the size and scope potentially of the backup alternative through these alternatives. So, we're just saving money ultimately in the size and scope of a large, of a central system. We may be able to get it from clusters. We may be able to get it from some of the other innovative stuff that Scott's been looking at and considering for the 95 Lawrence. It's sort of traditional clustered sewer technology, but because the number's smaller, it makes more sense.
Can I ask a question?
I like that point. Can I just say, I like the point that if we look at this as a starting point, but especially focusing on areas that are further removed from the high density around the town center. And then if they don't meet the reduction we need overall, it means that ultimately when we sewer, we don't have to sewer the far ends of the town. I think that's a very important point.
Well, the actual implementation though, or the installations will kind of go along with either transitions in the marketplace or failures of septic systems. So we don't know where they're going to end up.
No, I know that, of course.
But they're probably going to be distributed more widely throughout the town than otherwise would be the case.
Kurt, may I say something? It's Helen.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this for years, Scott. You may not know that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why, to tag on to what John Kumbler just said, there are areas in town, for example, the whole stretch of Briar Lane, all the way into the intersection with Main Street, that could be put on one cluster system with a small treatment, unit on the highway, right where it hits opposite Briar Lane, hits opposite Outer Cape Health. In the way in which Provincetown has some septic units right along the highway, even if it's within the state layout, we could get permission for that. Why are we not addressing neighborhoods like that, which have greater density and, could do very well on a cluster system? In other words, thinking creatively all over town doesn't just say, let's do individual units in the way in which you described, which sounds reasonable to me. And I was hoping for it years ago, like what Falmouth has, because it returns water to the place that it was taken from.
Yeah.
And I have to say that doing a cluster system for everything along Briar Lane would mean that A, their wells would be in better shape. They wouldn't have to be on municipal water. Not everybody there wants it or needs it, actually, legally. And also, that's right there on the marsh. So it would address the 208 plan. Thank you for letting me share that.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. Those are good thoughts,
Yeah.
Helen. And that's one of the reasons why I think the 95 Lawrence project might be a good pilot to at least study this from an engineering standpoint, which I know is being done. Bowler has been hired by the town or is being hired to do that. That's just as an example, but that could be applied to other cluster neighborhoods like you're suggesting.
Yeah, and I think Helen, it's a great point, Helen. And I think that what we're trying to do is, or I think the reasonable thing to do is to take advantage of, existing situations where we can, in fact, where there's a real opportunity like the 95 Lawrence, to go ahead and do something there, get the pilot going so that we can look at those alternatives. The other thing is that, if we have a program for enhanced INA systems, we're going to get better handle on the costs of those as well. So there's a cost trade-off too of whether the INA makes more sense or a cluster makes more sense, even for Briar Lane. So what we're trying to do, I think, is develop, or at least what Scott's focus here is do real things with real monitoring to get real cost information so we can apply that as we adaptively manage the program. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in fact, I just switched the slide because it's a good segue. These are the actual costs from the Buzzards-based study. So they've got installation costs, you get the ranges and the average here, as well as the operation, maintenance, and monitoring. And you can see that one of the systems they looked at is in fact this nitro system that we've been talking about. So we've got some real numbers here. You can see that up here, the average cost of the denitrification tank is about 10 grand, which is what we were talking about, I think, with the town, Hillary, as a potential cost share. So that's kind of where that number comes from. And I think I've talked to John Smith about that. That's pretty close to what and by the way, it doesn't have to be John Smith's system. There are a couple. There's another one, Nitrix, which is also has provisional approval, I think, and probably more coming. So, but that's just an example. So we do have some costs here. And you can see that these annual costs around monitoring get pretty significant, going back to what I said earlier about that's going to be a real driver going forward as to how much monitoring ultimately would get required. But I think, as you suggested, Kurt, it would be intensive up first couple, 3 years. And after that, I think presumably with good performance, that would drop back significantly.
The other thing I'd point out too, Scott, is based on what Hillary said about the numbers, if we actually had a Board of Health regulation and we were in the position of installing something like 50 systems a year, we would get to DEP approval much more quickly for the whole program.
Well, another good segue. Here's the health regulation. This is the language I sent over before. The numbering just corresponds with what you've got in the health regs now. And so one thought was, or is, to require upgrades. Section 608 would essentially say, right now I think it's just within a certain distance to a wetland, as I recall. So I changed this to be the entire watershed. Now we could also target this per like today's conversation. Some of you were suggesting maybe we target this in areas that might not be sewered if you ever do any sewering centrally. So that area could be, excuse me, defined. But right now I have it in the whole Wellfleet Bay watershed as defined by MEP, because that's what the town needs to address. And I did put 19 milligrams per liter in here because that's what all of the nitrogen systems are approved for. So that would really open up the market for homeowners to really pick any of these systems. But as we all know, many of them that are out there, are not performing nearly as well as say the nitro or the nitrix, some of these other enhanced INA. So this next paragraph, 609, would provide the option if they were to go for one of these so-called enhanced programs or technologies, that the town would provide a funding source for that component as an incentive to go with that system. And then I did add a sentence down here about the town would have to decide which systems qualify. And the way I worded it would be that systems, they have to provide third-party monitoring, third-party meaning something like MassTech, George Hoyfelder's test site, et cetera, that shows that they consistently meet the 10 milligrams per liter or less. And again, as an example, John Smith's system, and I think nitric system are both doing that. And then it also says other technologies can be brought forward by applicants and petition the Board of Health for approval. That way we not get criticized that we're only providing this benefit for just 2 technologies. But right now, I think those are the only 2 other than George's so-called layer cake, which is not commercially available at this point. So that's kind of what I laid out here. I talked about this with Hillary before, kind of a 2-step health regulation to try to get this going. Now, the trigger for this could be whatever Hillary and her board thinks is appropriate, whether it be repairs, upgrades, new systems, or it could be applied to real estate transfers, which would be a larger number. And then once we decide that, I can then use that to project over this 20-year planning period how many we might get, and then calculate back in that calculator how many we might get over that 20-year period. And my recollection is that at the 40 to 50 per year over 20 years, it gets us pretty far. So I think it's a reasonable way to proceed. But anyways, that's what I've got so far for, it's basic, it's simple in terms of a potential health regulation. What we would need to add here is some of the stuff that Falmouth is looking at to talk about this responsible management entity and explain explicitly the role of the homeowners versus the town. So that would need to be added here if we move forward with this.
So question, would this get enacted after our watershed permit gets approved by DEP? So like that's sort of the progression? I
think so. That's a good question, Hillary. I mean, I think it could go either way. One thought would be that, we have to get DEP to approve this plan.
Yeah.
And as we all know, it's always better to have something that's already in place, convincing, rather than saying, yes, we're going to do this. So maybe even a resolution or something, the town saying, the Board of Health voting for a resolution saying we will do this if in fact we get the permit. Something like that might work.
Yeah, and the Board of Health, if they're so inclined, could approve this regulation and just have a effective date, after the watershed permit is approved, this regulation.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Sure.
Yeah.
That's a good thought.
And I think, I just want to add that I like the 608 and the 609 because I don't think we can discount the 19 milligrams per liter because there are a lot of systems that fall into that category.
Yeah.
And I do like the incentive for those that are going to get something that's provisional because there's obviously more sampling that's required with the provisional systems than the general use, 19 milligrams per liter systems. So I think there's merit to having both. So
Good.
And there's some risk too. The other thing though is I think if the Board of Health were so inclined to pass this, I don't see it as being, I don't see the watershed permit in this being separate or mutually exclusive. I mean, if the regulation were enacted, it's just we would take credit for that within the plan. So it could be done, and we could move forward on it regardless of when we get the actual watershed permit.
Yeah, Kurt, this is Helen. Can I address something through Hillary for confirmation?
Sure.
So Hillary, and you've heard me say this before, whether or not we get the watershed permit, whether or not we're required by the state to comply in ways that other towns might find difficult, hasn't Wellfleet already been moving in the direction of one system at a time, trying to make this situation better? My memory is that this has been happening over the 21 years I've been involved with town stuff. And isn't that a way to show the DEP that we're willing and will continue to try whether or not we get the watershed permit, which is, tagging on to what Kurt just said? Don't we have credibility with them up to a point already?
Well, I think they are aware of our local regulations. They are aware of what we do. But again, we require the IA, well, when we put that regulation into effect, it was more to protect drinking water opposed to harbor waters. So, I mean,
The other
to
thing
answer your
too is,
question about credibility, we have some level of credibility, but I think they would want to see us have something, you know, more concrete, that the Board of Health has seen this, reviewed this, they'd be on board for this. And, you know, we have an effective date after our permit is approved, or if the Board of Health wants to move in this direction, then they certainly can put this regulation into effect right away if they so desire. So, I mean, we can go a couple different ways.
I agree with that. It needs to be upgraded, the whole attention to this. But my point is, we care about it anyway. That's my take on it.
right. The other thing is that the difference between this and what we've got going and have had going in the past is that the enhanced IAs approach they're almost equivalent to a sewer system. So you're at a removal rate that's the equivalent of sewer, and you get significantly better drinking water protection. So there's multiple elements to the enhanced IA.
Yes, I know. Thank you.
Kurt, can I ask something? Two things.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
One is for 609, I'm not sure it's necessary to go past the sentence that ends with testing, that the currently, et cetera, I don't think that needs to be in it. It just makes things more messy for us. The point we're trying to make is the 10% or the 10 milligrams per liter. That's the issue.
Right.
And I do like the idea, the two things. One, that that we push this forward. I mean, obviously it's a Board of Health issue, but I think the Board of Health should adopt this, you know, without regard to the watershed permit, which just helps us in that regard. And the other thing I think is that I think we need as many systems as possible on this. So I see no reason why we shouldn't add the real estate transaction as another requirement for putting this in, the way it is for putting in a Title V system. My comment.
This is Fred. I'm mean, obviously, it's one more comment on this. Is there any way? I mean, like, there are obviously, Helen brought up a good point. There are obviously areas in town that we want to, focus on. So Briar Lane, center of town, Commercial Street. Do you think there's any stomach to basically say, and then, to turn the dial up, on the amount of grants that we provide for in areas that are, our target areas? So in other words, if you're out in the middle of, Wellfleet Woods someplace where, a new septic system may be required, but it's not going to really mean a hell of beans to the harbor. But if you're on Commercial Street, it will. And therefore, maybe we should turn the dial up on how much we assist in putting in these AI systems.
Fred, can I address that quickly? Fred, guess what? 208 plan also has to address what goes on around the ponds. And having just come from the annual Ponds Association meeting, where they typically have Sophia Fox from the park, giving water reports, they're totally focused on having their wastewater not polluting the ponds. And the 208 plan requires that we deal with freshwater too. So while what you said is true, those remote locations also have to be addressed. We've got a lot of ponds. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so the ideas here that I think we want to talk about is, whether it makes sense for real estate transactions, failures of a septic system, a new build, and then something that we would call proximity to the watershed, which would be like an area of critical concern overlay, so sort of like a zoning overlay, that if you're within the overlay, you're considered proximate enough to whether it's a pond or the Wellfleet Harbor estuary, that you would then be tripped by this enhancement. So I guess those are at least the ideas and concepts. I don't, I think what we as a committee probably can do is think about them, maybe make a motion on something if we feel strongly one way or another. I think we need to have some more discussion about it because these are new concepts, but then we would make a recommendation, I guess, as a committee as to what, we felt would make some sense in the regulation, and then the Board of Health obviously would take it over, and it's their regulation to make a decision on anyway. It's not our jurisdiction. So does that kind of make sense as a process, Scott and Hillary?
Can I just jump in real quick? I'm gonna have to run. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that I know the Board of Health is looking at declaring all the cesspool systems to be failed. And that represents a one-shot number. I think it's in the hundreds of systems that they would declare that, if I'm correct. But having some guidelines as to what to replace those with would be very beneficial because it presents a one-time opportunity to get a bunch of very poorly performing systems out of the ground and replace them with something that will work much better.
I mean, what do you think, Hillary? What do you think we should do? Oh, she's tending to a young one. Richard, do you have any thoughts?
Not really.
So,
I'm
sorry, go ahead, Rich.
I was going to say, I don't think the idea of trying to change the incentives depending upon where you are makes a lot of sense because it brings in too much of a variable. Unless it's, clearly established boundaries. I don't like having the Board of Health having discretion, or the board that we're on having some sort of discretion in terms of what individuals are going to get. I'd much rather have a set system. I think it appears fairer.
Agreed. So, I mean, I don't know if we have to make a motion, but I mean, at this point, what I'm hearing here is discussion of, okay, an overlay, to go to Richard's point, that if we have an overlay, we basically say, if you're in this shaded area, we're gonna give you a bigger grant because it will reduce the nitrogen going into the estuary, into our estuaries.
Or ponds. Right.
Bang for the buck. It's basically a cost benefits analysis, right? But at the same time, we're not leaving anybody out that has to replace their systems. I guess the other part of this whole thing is like, okay, where is this X amount per system grant coming from? I know we kind of touched on that at the beginning of this conference, of this meeting, but that's the how much are we setting aside a year? I mean, I think we talked about something like $700,000 a year in this pool for enhanced systems as grants for enhanced systems, and where is that going to come from? And because eventually it's the dollar figure that's going to have to be approved by town meeting or by in some shape or form.
Yeah, I think what I prefer to do, Fred, is, not that that's not an important point. I think it's critical. How we fund the whole wastewater plan, I think is going to be, if we take each of these elements that Scott's got as, potential programs, we can start to add them up and start to see what they contribute, what the relative costs are, and ultimately what the total cost is. I think then it's going to, we'll have to have some separate discussions on funding, I think, that relate to, can we take this, does it make sense to go forward with a warrant item that funds the whole thing right now at this rate over X number of years? How much is coming from, the Airbnb tax? The funding thing is a very complicated issue that at least for now, I think we should set aside, because I think we have to figure out what needs to be the priorities and what the order of magnitude amount of spending would look like. Otherwise, we'll get balled up, and I think it'll take a long time to kind of go through the funding stuff. Does that make sense? You know, I think if we prioritize stuff that we think makes sense and get an action plan, it'll come to, you know, we'll see what the total looks like and then try to figure out how to fund it. We're going to obviously have to have discussions with the Board of Selectmen, with the town administrator. That's I think a lengthy process about what the overall budget's going to, and implementation. Who's the responsible management entity? You know, there's those other pieces, but if we could just set those aside for a minute and just kind of at least look at what we would want to propose or suggest as a health regulation to get things going, I think that at least then we're moving the ball down the field a little bit.
The only other comment I'll make on this discussion is I am confident that DEP will approve a targeted plan that includes some INAs, and I can say that because they approved Pleasant Bay. But Pleasant Bay was heavily, Pleasant Bay permit heavily focuses on centralized wastewater treatment, which I know is DEP's preference. So in this case, where my calculator currently stands, and we can actually go back and look at it, I actually have the numbers here. The overall, this plan, the way it sits right now, you can see that of the 20,000 kilograms we need to reduce, I'm looking at 8,000 plus another 7,000, you know, 14, 15, 3/4 of this is INAs. So we're really putting a lot of eggs in this basket. And I just want to be clear about that. And I say that because A, I'm not sure DEP will approve it. That I think there's a good argument they should, because we're talking about DEP approved technologies, but it's something that hasn't been done before. And then secondly, whoever made the comment earlier, which is a good comment, what happens 10, 15 years down the road if we find out, well, these are not working as well as we had hoped? So there is some risk there, and I just want to be clear and upfront about that. The way I think, my suggestion and the best way to deal with that is what DEP is going to require anyways, and that's part of the plan's got to have this so-called backup component of a centralized system, which is why you're having GHD do the work out at the transfer station. And we got to take another look at a collection area that might go with that. So I just want to get that out there because I want to be upfront and clear about it.
Yep. Hillary, what do you think we should do as far as a regulation?
I think we should have that joint meeting with the Board of Health and talk about it.
Okay.
Would be the next step.
Do we want to, I mean, does any member of the committee feel strongly about making recommendations as far as, you know, real estate transactions, failure, new builds, or, you know, doing a watershed overlay?
I think new builds, I'd be in favor of. Real estate transactions, I'd be in favor of, and an overlay. I'm not sure I'd go with repairs, but Hillary, you probably have a better experience with that, with repairs. I mean, is there a threshold that the board uses for repairs before they say, look, you have to put in a new system?
Failures?
So repairs are fairly modest. You know, if a septic tank is leaking or a pipe is cracked or a D-box is cracked, it's not, you know, repairs are minor. It's the upgrades that I think we want to, you know, hit upon, the folks that are actually installing new systems.
I agree.
I mean, kind of, Fred, do you have any other thoughts? Or John?
I'm with Richard on this one. I mean, like, you know, I think an overlay is a good idea because that targets I think it'll target like, you know, if it's 75% of our reduction, we want to target the most bang for the buck for that 75%. We may find that, you know, by targeting, putting an overlay in, we do better than that 75%. But I also agree that, you know, rebuilds, replacements, and are a good thing. And I'm not so sure about real estate transaction. I mean, I think we've already got, I mean, you've already got the requirement in there. If you have a failed, you know, you have to have your system tested before you, when you change ownership. And if the system is in bad shape or needs to be replaced, that automatically puts it in that second, you know, in the bucket of it's got to be replaced. So we're going to enhance it, you know. So I'm not sure if real estate transaction, it's sort of already built in. Am I correct in that, Hillary?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
When you change it, I mean, like my point is this, is that if you buy a piece of property here in Wellfleet, you have to test the septic system. And if the septic system is not, you know, the Title V system is not passing muster, it has to be replaced. It has to be upgraded. Okay. Well, you know, I think so. In effect, we don't really have to do anything. We don't have to make that part of a regulation or a thing, because just we've already said, if you upgrade your system, or if you're putting in a new system or putting in a system for a new build, it has to be an AI system.
But there'd be a lot of systems that would pass when there's a real estate transaction. It would be okay, be approved, you know, they'd pass the test, so it wouldn't need to be replaced. But the real estate transaction is one of those few transactions where the taxpayer is going to get a fair amount of money, or the seller is going to get a fair amount of money, hopefully. And so it's a situation where they can afford to pay for it, in theory.
Yeah, in theory.
Kurt, I think we should go for as many ways to get people to move into the new systems as we possibly can. I think it's all of the above.
Do you want to recommend this, or do you want to just leave it up? You know, here's the 4 categories that you might want to consider applying this for, and leave it up to the Board of Health?
I think it's our job to recommend it.
Okay. Does somebody want to make a motion?
I move that we recommend to the Board of Health all 4 options. And just as an aside, before somebody thinks about seconding this, would point out that we give out, if we recommend all 4 and they said we're only going to go with 3 or 2, you know, at least we've got, you know, it's sort of like we can accept, you know, 3 or 2 as opposed to all 4.
All it affects is how many systems Scott's going to have on his master spreadsheet. I mean, the number of systems goes up if we are including real estate transactions compared with what he's got right now. Right, and then if we also did a density overlay, the numbers would go up as well from what Scott's only got new builds and failures in his numbers. So those other 2 categories would bump up the number of systems that would be would potentially be installed.
Do we have any sense of what those numbers would be? Or is it easy to get those numbers, Hillary?
Well, it differs from year to year, and I think we had just a rough estimate of, you know, 40 to 50 per year.
That's the failures, though, right?
That's
Yes.
not necessarily failure.
Or no, failures are new builds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So real estate transactions and a density overlay would up the numbers. We'd have to look at that. But anybody
There
want to
are a
second
lot.
Fred's motion?
There are a lot of real estate transfers.
Yeah, a ton of transfers.
Yeah.
I would like to second the motion.
Sorry.
Okay. Go
Could I
ahead, Hillary.
second the motion, which we have on the floor?
Hillary?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, you know, a lot of systems that still pass the Title V inspection are the old code systems. So they're the leach pits that still pass. Cesspools are automatically failed, but we do get a fair amount of passing leach pits from the old code, old Title V. So I just put that out there.
So I guess we got a motion, it's been seconded. And I guess as I would see it, we would just transfer this to the Board of Health with that recommendation. And then the Board of Health would then take it up. And we could probably, with some of Scott's help, get some numbers around, what the real estate transactions would look like on an annual basis. I don't know how we go about doing a watershed overlay. I think that's a whole nother exercise, but I'm not sure whether that's something we should do or whether the Board of Health would do that or how that would happen. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Kurt, the way I have it referenced right now is the MEP watershed as a whole, which is a good hunk of the town. The one watershed that's probably the least important from the numbers is Herring River, which is a big area. And as you know, we've talked before, one thing we don't have in here is what the Herring River watershed, Herring River Restoration Project might provide. So there may be less of a need out there, but the way I drafted it was just to include the whole MEP watershed.
But does that include the ponds, to Helen's point?
Well, some of the ponds I think are in there, but not all of them. So that's something that could be added. Of course, the other component there is with ponds, it's both phosphorus and nitrogen, and these systems are targeting nitrogen. So there may be different technologies in some of those cases.
Well, phosphorus is kind of a non-issue because EPA already took phosphorus out, so that's going away on its own. It's really the nitrogen issue at the moment.
But don't we think that phosphorus is damaging to our ponds?
Right.
We're not getting, it is, but we're not getting new amounts of phosphorus because there's no more phosphorus in soap.
Correct.
So, I mean, at least going forward, if we'd have to do phosphorus remediation to do anything about phosphorus, but as far as the regulation goes, we're at least on target with what's being added to ponds as we go forward.
Yeah, can I say something, Kurt?
Sure.
Helen, let's keep our eyes on the prize, which once again has nothing to do really with this new mandate that we've got, which is, always be aware of how much phosphorus is going into the water. And question for you to Hillary. Hillary, CONSCOM, has its 100 feet back from every resource. And isn't that also a way to look at what goes into the watershed? Even if you have a vernal pool, that you might not want to include in watershed remediation. But that would be a good overlay map to look at when considering this matter, because it's much more complete in terms of, 100 feet back from
So I
service water.
think what the Board of Health has been trying to get a handle on over the past 2 years is sort of a 300-foot setback from a wetland resource area. The 300 feet is a number that has been identified as a protective radius from these types of resources for nutrients. And so what we've been working on with our AmeriCorps members for what feels like forever to get through our files, to locate these properties and see what types of systems are there, and to eliminate all of the cesspools in town, in addition to finding these properties within 300 feet and then requiring IA on those properties. So that's sort of been the road we've been traveling down as the Board of Health. So I think there is value in a specific setback to look at, or, it's that approach, or we just look at everything because it seems as though everywhere in town it would be beneficial.
Kurt, if I could just say something.
Sure, Janet, thank you.
I just, as a Board of Health member, I think in looking at this very great motion that you've made, I'd want that overlay number, really. And the second thing I wanted to say as a Board of Health member also is that our short-term rental regulation that's in the process of being made will also probably increase the number once that happens and it gets approved. And I don't have to tell you about the public's embracing of that new regulation when it comes to short-term rentals. So that's just food for thought.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carries 4-0. Terrific. I think this is great. I think it's a great first step, and at least the Board of Health now has something that they can chew on. And as they work through it, then we can, feed their decision back to Scott in terms of what the ultimate numbers are going to look like. That's great. I want to try to keep the meeting as brief as possible. We've got a couple of items here on the agenda that, Scott, I'm going to defer to you a little bit. We were going to talk about the wood chip bioreactors, transfer station, Harborside Village, and minutes. Do you want to pick one of those that we can talk about and then move on to minutes and then kind of try to wrap up here by 12:30?
Sure. I mean, maybe we can let the other members know what's up with the transfer station. You were out there recently with GHD. They're starting the field work. They're moving ahead. We've had a couple of conference calls with them. So I think it's fair to say they're off and running. And I'd ask if Kurt or Hillary want to add to that, because I know you've both been involved in that. But that's moving forward. And that's going to be an important component of this plan for sure.
Yeah, so I can do a real quick update. We had a good hour meeting out there to work with the consultant to identify water sources and kind of identify a work plan for doing the infiltration study. And I think everything's in good shape. The fire department's cooperating, DPW is cooperating, and probably by mid-September, we should be doing an infiltration study over a 3-day period. Anything else, Hillary, you want to add?
No, just that the DPW and the fire department have been very useful, and they're all on board to help us, and it's moving forward finally, so it's exciting.
Hey, Hillary and Kurt, did we have to build some more monitoring and test wells? Did they have to put those in as well?
Yeah, there will be a monitoring well that will go in at the location that'll remain once it's been installed. So yes, there is a monitoring well that will go in.
So the 50 monitoring wells that are already there aren't good enough?
No.
They need it closer to the site where we're doing the water test so that they can monitor the rise.
Okay.
Actually,
it's in
specifically
close
where the
proximity.
infiltration beds would be. I know, Fred. I know. I know. It's all the same topography.
It's okay. I smile at these things.
Hillary's just keeping the eye on the goal, which is making DEP happy.
Understood.
Very committed to that. I am very committed to that.
Thanks, Hillary. I appreciate it. It's just like, I live next to the dump and I know where all those monitoring wells are.
So did you want to talk about wood chips or Harborside Village, Scott?
I don't think we really need to address too much there. I mean, Harborside Village came up as part of the Mayo Creek discussion, and I think John Reel sent me a report, which I'm still going through to look at the data there. So we can postpone any discussion of that.
Okay.
And the wood chips, we talked about that as a potential enhancement of that Mayo Creek project, or maybe even other locations. But I don't have anything more specific than what we talked about last time around.
Okay, terrific.
Yep.
Can I ask Scott a question? Scott?
Yes.
On your spreadsheet that we're all looking at,
Yep. Sure.
you've got about 15,000 kilograms coming from the IAs
Yeah.
at about $400 each.
Right.
So that's about $6 million. And of that, the town would be paying for about a third of it on a, $10,000 out of a $30,000 septic system. Does that,
Wait a minute.
does that make sense?
Let me think here. These are These numbers are per year, the kilograms per year. So if you're multiplying the number of kilograms times the dollars, those would be annual figures for cost.
Okay. But
So-
does that make sense, looking at it that way? I'm just trying to get a
Yes,
sense as to
yeah,
what
no,
we're
I think
looking
it does.
at
I think it
overall.
does.
So
Yes.
it's about $2 million or something like that for the IAs per
So
year.
you multiplied the 370 times the,
Yeah, I did it roughly. Let's say it's 400 and it's 15,000. That's 6 million.
Yeah, but of the
Yeah.
400, there's a big chunk that's monitoring that I think is going to get reduced quite a bit.
yeah, I think that's right. I think this number will come down. So this is
Closer to the
this is
one.
probably a good number for the first several years, first 3 years, and then theoretically it should drop because the monitoring cost should drop.
Yeah, it should drop more toward the 95 Lawrence, more toward 150.
The other consideration here is I believe this 370 includes the entire cost of the system, and if the town is only contributing the 10 grand part of it, that would make it go down too.
Right. Well,
So
that's what I'm
what-
thinking. If the total is
Yeah.
6 million and the IA system is about 30 grand and the town's putting in 10, it's about a third of that, or 2 million.
Right,
Right.
right. So I think,
Right.
yeah, I think you're looking at it the right way.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And those are big numbers, right, Richard? I mean,
They're big numbers, but they're not, astronomical numbers. I mean, they're big relative to the town's budget. It's 10%.
well, and I think we've always got to keep in mind too, the bogey is still 100 to 150 million for a traditional sewer system. So
Exactly. And so compared to that, it's nothing.
Yeah, the one slide I didn't show you is this one. This is the 95 Lawrence project. It's a good idea of how a cluster might work. And you may recall I showed you some of this before without the cost figures, I think. So the three options were the housing project alone. The second one ties in the police, fire, and elementary. And then the third one pulls in some of the residential homes in the area as well. So it goes from essentially 10,000 gallons a day up to 20 and then up to 30. So it's three scenarios. And here's your dollars per kilogram out here, as I suggested earlier. And John, when I spoke to John Smith about this project, he was very excited because he said we can really make some significant reductions and cost efficiency with a larger system. And that's kind of evident in how these numbers work here. So you can see compared to the $370 a kilogram, with a cluster system, we might be able to get, and this is assuming using his same technology, we can get it down to maybe half that with a larger cluster system because we're sharing facilities. So as we talked before, trying to identify, one thing we might do looking forward is other cluster areas. What you mentioned, I wrote it down. What street was it? I'm sorry. Briar Lane, yeah. I'm not super familiar with that, but if people have other ideas, that's something that DEP will look favorably on too. These cluster systems.
yeah, the other idea would be some of the dense areas around some of the ponds where you have quite a few homeowners.
Right.
That may be another area to think about, but that's great. I think that's a good start. Fred, do you want to just update us on minutes? You got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I know. I gotta, let me share my screen and I can show you the minutes that I have right now.
Is this the same you emailed this morning, Fred?
Yeah. So, if Scott can stop sharing his screen.
Oh, yeah, I can do that.
Let me share. I can start sharing my screen. We can go
There you
from
go.
there. Okay. So,
And I'll be right back.
all right. Share screen.
I just made you a co-host, Fred, so you should be able to do it now.
Are you guys seeing my screen now?
Yep.
So the last time that we met in person, I think was February 13th, or the last time I met with you guys in person was on February 13th. And these were the meeting minutes that I took, that I transposed this morning. And they're, so at this point, these are the only meeting minutes that we need to either approve or adjust. I guess I could make a motion now to accept these minutes as written.
I have one typo, or what I think is a typo, in Article 11, motion that the January 1st, 2020 minutes be accepted.
Yeah,
You didn't really meet on January 1st, did you?
we did meet on January 1st.
You did? All right, you people are special.
It was the, I think it was the
'Cause
third.
I actually took those minutes too, and that's what the date was.
All right, okay. Yeah, I wasn't there, so I don't know.
Yeah, you were in Brazil or something?
Yeah, Brazil.
Okay.
We met the 3rd, Fred. It was Friday the 3rd.
It was Friday the 3rd, these minutes?
Yeah,
3rd?
yeah.
Okay, so let's
Richard's
change
correct.
that. I will change that. I'm sorry, for some reason.
No, not the February 13th. It was the January. It was January 3rd. We didn't meet on the 1st. We met on the 3rd.
Okay, so,
Right.
okay, so this should,
Yeah, that's January 3rd. Yep.
all right, so I can,
I'll second your motion. To
what?
accept the minutes.
Accept the minutes with that,
That correction.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Fantastic. For, what do we need to do? Were you able to talk to Courtney about the rest of the meetings that have been recorded? What we have to do, if anything?
I have not, Kurt, and that's in my I gotta do that. So I haven't reached out to Courtney yet. I know we talked yesterday, and I just been overcome by events on this, or the other day. Remember.
You mean there's a little storm down south that you might be otherwise engaged in?
Well, there's this COVID-19 thing. We got Tropical Storm Isaias damages in Connecticut, and then there was this Laura. Then there was these fires in California. You might have heard about them.
Aren't you getting ready to retire?
Oh yeah, it's be too soon.
Terrific. Well, I think that's our business for today. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, have a great day, guys. I will send these to send these updated minutes to Courtney.
Terrific. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Hillary and Helen and everybody else that was on. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Letting me participate.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Okay.